So, not long ago, there was a movie, Hunt for the Wilder People, based on the Barry Crump book, Wild Pork and Watercress. Reading right now, Barry Crump, 40 Yarns and a Song. So I'm going to read you the first yarn in this book. I was born in 1935, and one of my earliest memories is of lighting a fire when I was 3. I found a box of matches and set fire to a bundle of hay under the house. Then I trotted round to the wash house and told my mother to come and look at the nice fire. She didn't believe me until she saw the smoke pouring out from under the house. She believed me then. There was much more fuss than I thought the occasion warranted. They put the fire out before it did any damage. My first fire. I probably remember it because of the spanking that went with it. It wasn't fair either. The lady who owned the farm our father worked on had burned a whole truck and load of hay just before that. They were trying to pour petrol into it in the dark and asked her to bring a light. So she went over to her house and came back with a candle, and it set fire to the split petrol. Everything got burnt, but she didn't get spanked. They said that was an accident. Nothing's fair when you're a kid. I survived and grew, despite repeated and determined efforts to poison me off. They had some rather strange notions about medical care in those days. At the slightest suspicion of worms, I was force-fed 2 tablespoons of kerosene, any sign of stomach upset, and out came the tall, thin blue bottle of castor oil, and my nose would be held while 2 tablespoons of the stuff was poured down my throat. The average dose seemed to be always 2 tablespoons, which was a diabolical thing. You could usually make yourself swallow the first one if you were quick, but to get the second one down, with the taste of the first one still in your mouth, required reserves of courage you never knew you had. There was no pretending to be sick in the stomach at our place. In those days there was a Raleigh's man, never a woman, who came around all the houses with medicines and medical advice from others, a modern-day medicine man. Us kids didn't like our medicine man any more than the African kids probably liked theirs, because after one of his visits we were usually in for a course of milk and magnesia, like drinking smelly chalk, to keep our stomachs healthy so we wouldn't need any castor oil or daily doses of cod liver oil, vile slime for our bowels, or God save us, blackstrap molasses to give us, of all things, iron. At one stage, our mother, bless her, inspired by an aunt who had no kids of her own to experiment on, lined us all up on Saturday mornings and gave us a revolting dose of sulfur and treacle. Because you need it, it's good for you. Injuries, too, were treated with medieval callousness. Cuts and grazes were dabbed with a highly toxic chemical substance called iodine that stung like wasps and far transcended any pain you might have been complaining about before that. Burns were smeared with butter or flour, according to the myth your parents subscribed to, and the burn was held as near to the fire as you could bear without screaming, and then drawn away again very slowly. The reason given for this barbaric practice was that it drew the heat slowly from the wound, and the butter or flour reduced the possibility of scars. Bruises were handled in much the same kind of way. A poultice of some sticky kind of dough was applied to the bruised area at a temperature that had you just about clinging to the roof, pain on top of pain. Prickles were gouged out of your foot with the darning needle. Don't jerk like that or you'll prick yourself. Stoicism building stuff. Cold and flu were always treated the same in our house. If it was bad enough for you to stay away from school, you were given a dose of the current poison to build you up, and then made to sit hunched over a basin of crushed blue gum leaves in boiling water with a towel over your head, breathing in the acrid fumes until you were almost fainting. Once again, the remedy was a worse experience than the ailment. We weren't sick very often at our place. We were too scared to be. They had some funny ideas about food, too. When I was a kid, there had been a war and rationing, and the general attitude of the adult was that kids ate everything that was put in front of them, even things like marrow and cucumber, tripe and brains, tongues and livers. Anything that tasted good was bad for your teeth. White bread gave you soft white bones, and brown bread gave you strong brown ones, and the crust gave you curly hair. Green vegetables gave you that iron we seem to need so urgently. Porridge stuck to your ribs. Carrots gave you good eyesight so you could see in the dark. Meat gave you a thing called protein, which was so important that nobody could explain what it was. Fat put a lining on your stomach. Fish was brain food and improved your intelligence. Eggs gave you energy, and you couldn't eat too many of them. And fruit helps you fight off sickness. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. In spite of the fact that most of the kids in our school lived on dairy farms, they made us drink a free pint of milk at school every day because it gave us calcium, without which all our teeth and hair would fall out and your bones would turn to chalk. Whatever they told you to eat, you ate it because it was good for you. One of my brothers couldn't eat the fat off his meat, and if he didn't get any pudding. So he took stashing his fat along a ledge under the big Corey kitchen table. He would have continued getting away with it, except that he didn't get it out and give it to the dogs when no one was around, and his little subterfuge was discovered when our horrified mother, a meticulous woman, discovered maggots dropping onto the kitchen floor from under the table. I'll never forget poor brother Billy's face as he gulped down a big piece of mutton fat under the old man's watchful glare at dinner that night. Our parents were fairly straight-laced, and their statements about sex and reproduction were a source of constant amusement to us kids. Here we were on a farm, surrounded by things that bred, the dogs, the cats, the cows, sheep, horse, goats, pigs, rabbits, and the burros, and the birds in the trees, breeding all away all around us. And the old man tells our little sister that the bull jumps up on the cow so you can see over the paddock. Our mother was no better. "Why is the dog pumping up the other dog, Mummy?" our sister asked one day. Mum paused for a few moments and then said, "Because dogs go flat sometimes, dear." No wonder our sister used to tell us other kids that she knew more about sex than Mummy and Daddy. We all did, if they believed what they told us about it. Apart from things like that, and all the work I had to do on the farm, and all the trouble I got into at school and at home, it was a happy enough childhood. I especially liked the farm animals, and especially didn't like school. I was only barely average at schoolwork, and I wouldn't have even been if it wasn't for a rather strange set of circumstances. Our parents' relatives and their friends subscribed to the children should be seen and not heard school of thought, and like all parents and relatives and their friends, they didn't know that the kids knew more than their parents and relatives and their friends suspected. Our parents and relatives and their friends had a habit of spelling things out when they didn't want us kids to know what they were talking about. Little pigs have big ears, they'd spell out. Being a nosy little brat, I was determined to get to the bottom of this spelling business. I soaked up everything I could about words and what they meant and how they were spelt, and by the time I'd been at school for a year, I could pick up enough of what the adults were spelling out to know what they were saying, and I heard some interesting stuff. I found out that some people I'd stayed with had wanted to adopt me, and my mother had been indignant about it. I knew who was going where for the holidays before any of the other kids. I knew when they were thinking about getting another car. I knew why the farmhand got kicked off Uncle Ned's farm so suddenly. I knew we were expecting another little brother or sister. They also spelled out a lot of other stuff that us kids already knew. This facility with words and spelling gave me a head start with that sort of thing at school, and I'm sure that's what scraped me through the exams. I also scraped through that nightmare of contradictions they called childhood and emerged a semi-literate adolescent from the cocoon of family life, out into the wide world, still believing that you could get atomic radiation from sitting too close to the radio, heaven was up in the sky somewhere, hell was under the earth, and yacht was pronounced yacht.